Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Black Mirror season 5 on Netflix. Let's talk about it. So Black Mirror has always been one of my favorite TV shows. I absolutely love the fact that it's filled with layers and depth of meaning. Nothing is ever quite as it seems, and I love the fact that they always have a message in the show, even though it does tend to be a bit preachy and it's usually about some form of technology taking over people's lives. But to be honest, that is the impending doom that we're facing right now, so it's not really that far off. In terms of this season, I was looking forward to seeing it. I did know that it was going to be shorter than the other seasons because of Bandersnatch, which I had a really fun time with. It's not the best Black Mirror episode, but that added element of it being interactive is definitely something that is interesting, at least for a weekend. But I did feel like it was unfortunate that the compromise there was having a shorter season, but hopefully the season would definitely make use of those episodes and really give us something amazing to sink our teeth into. But that isn't quite what happened, and in my opinion this season overall was quite disappointing. So we're going to get into each of the episodes in this review. Because it is only a 3-episode season, we're going to just break it down from episode to episode. There will be spoilers of course in this review, and I will be ranking each episode, and then overall at the very end we will be giving season 5 of Black Mirror an overall score. So without further ado, let's get into the review. So I've been filming a couple of videos today, and I figure since I still have a little bit of energy, I'd like to dedicate that to my favorite episode of the season, and that was Smithereens. Now a lot of the reason why I love this episode is because of Andrew Scott. I think he's absolutely phenomenal here. His performance is so nuanced. He's able to convey the torture and the regret, the guilt that he feels due to the fact that he is responsible for the death of his beloved fiancée, and all because he was distracted by a stupid, ridiculous app. He just wanted to check what the equivalent of a tweet here is, and as a result he ended up losing someone that he loved so much. And on top of that is the fact that everyone feels sorry for him. Everyone feels like he's the one who should be sympathized with, when actually he feels the guilt for being responsible. It's just such a nuanced performance. At the beginning you're convinced that this guy is a psycho, that he's a creep, that he's obviously up to no good, and then he confirms that when he kidnaps the intern, and then he switches cars and everything's happening all at once, and you're like, yes, this is definitely the villain of the episode. But then that starts to unravel as you get to know him a bit better through the work of the police officers, as well as him revealing more of his own story. And in his mind, this is the very last thing that he wants to do on the planet, is get answers from the CEO of the make-believe app here, and just talk to him and tell him about his experience before he leaves this world by his own doing. And again, this is Black Mirror at its very core. The idea that technology is the devil and Snap Instabook is going to kill us all. It's definitely on brand for the series, but the way that it's done and the fact that the main character is the villain here, because ultimately it is his fault, but at the same time the fault needs to be shared with the people who design these apps to make them so addictive, so that you'll constantly be on them. That also created another layer to the narrative, and you have that added layer of meta narrative, which actually my friend pointed out to me. The idea that as soon as the episode is over and you're left with that obscure ending, you don't know who ended up dying, and everyone is just scrolling through their phones, but then you, of course, being in the 21st century, will grab your phone and be like, oh, what was the ending of Black Mirror season 5 episode 2? What did it all mean? And you end up in the hole that is social media alongside the characters as well. So I feel like it just works on so many different levels. I really enjoyed the performances of all of the actors here, like I said, especially Andrew Scott, and I also really enjoyed Topher Grace. That was a surprise. I didn't realize that he was going to be in this season. I feel like a lot of the new marketing for Black Mirror has been focused on a lot of the US stars, which makes sense because the US is a huge market. But for me, Black Mirror definitely feels most authentic when it's based in the UK, when it's British and it's a bit grimier. It's not as clean and perfected and shiny, and everything just feels a bit more authentic as a result, in my opinion. Whereas the other episodes, which we'll get into, they feel very shiny. Even when the characters themselves aren't wealthy or anything like that, it just feels like there's a sheen, the Hollywood sheen that exists there. But going back to Topher Grace, I also like the fact that they did interact with the CEO of the company, and he he didn't end up being this Mark Zuckerberg type character. He actually really cared. It was everyone else in his company that was restricting him and giving him PR notes and ruining the whole situation and confusing the whole situation. But at the end of the day, the character just wants to level with the taxi driver, and he just wants to understand where he's coming from a human perspective. And I think that was a really interesting angle. And finally, what really works about this episode is the fact that even though we are stuck in the same place for a very long time here, the dynamic between the two characters in the car works so well. And at first it's antagonistic because of course the intern has been kidnapped, but then it becomes so much more friendlier and more compassionate on both sides, and I really enjoyed that because it kind of peels away the layers of Andrew Scott's character. But also the intern, who's played by the actor that I will put on screen here, he does such a great job of coming across as very sympathetic as a victim, but also very understanding on just a human level as he finds out more about the story of this taxi driver. So overall, clearly I was a huge fan of this episode. I think the only issue that I really took with it was some of the pacing. I think it dragged a bit in the middle there, and I think it could have been cut a bit shorter just to be a bit more impactful. So overall, I would rate episode 2, also known as Smithereens, an 8 out of 10. Next up, let's move on to the episode that I liked second best, and that was Striking Vipers, starring Anthony Mackie. First off, I have to say I was not a huge fan of the posters that they had for this episode. They looked very bizarre. They made him look very bizarre because it was so photoshopped that he kind of looked like a completely different person. So it wasn't a huge fan there. But in terms of the episode itself, I found it to be quite lackluster. I kept waiting for something to happen that would really shock me and would really Black Mirror the hell out of the situation, but it felt very bog standard because I pretty much predicted what the broad strokes of the episode would be from the very beginning, like from the get-go. I don't know how, I don't know why, I don't know what that says about me, but in terms of the story itself, there just wasn't any depth to it in my opinion, at least not to the level that we usually see in Black Mirror episodes. So here what's explored is this dissatisfaction within a seemingly perfect marital relationship. They have a child, they have a really nice home, which again speaks to what I was saying earlier about everything being so shiny and so just perfect in these American episodes, which doesn't really feel very Black Mirror to me, but I digress. The sense of dissatisfaction was definitely present on the husband's side. I thought Anthony Mackie did almost too good of a job depicting someone who was very, I don't know, he just felt very dull. He felt very lifeless at times. We'll get to that later on in the review. But overall, I did get more of a sense of his dissatisfaction than hers. And I think that was one of the big problems that I had with this episode. That's kind of the main theme of the episode, the idea that he finds escapism in a very sexualized way in the video game. And he's actually playing with one of his oldest friends, who is depicted by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. Very cool name. Funnily enough, even though Anthony Mackie's character definitely conveys more of his dissatisfaction in the marriage, in terms of the relationship between the two best friends, I definitely think that Yahya's character was much more explicitly interested in the sexual interactions in the game than Anthony Mackie's character was. Like, there was definitely an imbalance there where I felt like one wanted it way more than the other, but it is kind of interesting how when they met up and they did kiss, like, they felt nothing physically. It was literally just through the video game that the attraction existed. And going back to the marriage itself, and you have just this one scene where the wife has been hit on and because she arrived early for their anniversary dinner. I don't think that was enough to establish that it was a mutual feeling of dissatisfaction in the marriage. I definitely felt like one side wanted more involvement and engagement and the other was kind of detached. One of my pet peeves when it comes to, films, TV shows and their depiction of couples that are, experiencing relationship issues is that there is a fine line between having this couple who clearly had passion between them once upon a time but that has fallen apart since, versus a couple whose issues just seem so significant to the point where you can't see how they ever even liked each other. And to me, the marriage here in this episode veered on the latter, in terms of me not really seeing how they were ever passionate towards each other. In fact, no, correction, me not seeing how Anthony Mackie's character was ever passionate towards the wife, because he just seemed so indifferent the whole time, and he seemed like someone was dragging him by the ear to just be involved in their family, that it felt like, how did they even have a child in the first? Like, how did this ever even happen? But on a plus note, I will say that I did very much enjoy the performances. I thought the characters were portrayed very well, especially Yahya Abdul-Mateen. And I did enjoy seeing 3 actors who portray comic book movie characters, the Falcon, Mantis, and Black Manta. That was really fun. But otherwise, I will say that overall this episode was a disappointing beginning to this season. And so I'm going to give Striking Vipers a 6 out of 10. Now let's talk about the last episode of the season. Now when it comes to this episode, I was just outrightly in disbelief. I couldn't believe what I was watching, what my eyeballs were experiencing. I felt like I had just switched to some random show somehow on my laptop and was watching something off of the Disney Channel. Like, it was just so off, and not just because of Miley Cyrus starring in this episode. Now, I like Miley Cyrus, but I do feel like she's a better singer than she is an actress. I don't think her performance really shone here at all. And also, I understand casting her in theory, like on paper, it seems like a very good idea. Like, oh yes, she used to be Hannah Montana. Her real life story applies to this fictional story so well, of course you would want her on board. But in actuality, what we ended up with was just so on the nose. There was no nuance or obscurity that we saw in Smithereens, for example. None of that here. I don't know about you guys, but I am just sick to death of this trope of having this pop star who is empty and void of all musical integrity and meaning, and is only money hungry. Like, I am just so tired of that, versus the rock star or the country music star who is always filled with meaning and depth in their lyrics, and they write their own songs or whatever. Not necessarily. That is not necessarily always true, and I'm just so tired of this trope. Especially here, the intent is for Ashley O to actually be an uplifting and positive role model. The execution is a bit confused, but I actually saw her as a breath of fresh air in comparison to the other pop idols that we usually see in actuality. So it was a bit confusing to see why this character, who actually embodies a lot of positivity inside of her and inspires a lot of young people, would just be so miserable in her role. And I understand that she felt trapped by her aunt because she was being forced to write this narrative and be this type of artist or be this type of pop star. But whilst they kept telling us that actually depicting this pop star was a bad thing, I never actually felt that. And as a result, she came across as very ungrateful, very whiny, and just sulky for no reason, because she had everything. She had this amazing house, she has a booming career, and she could change directions in her material if she wanted to, but it didn't have to be so drastic. Like, I felt like there was no nuance in this character, because either she was a goody goody two shoes or she was just a mess who was swearing and throwing F-bombs left, right and center. Like, there was no middle part to her that made her feel like an actual person, like an actual three-dimensional character. And so of course the only way that they could really remedy that was having this really awful aunt who ended up doing just the worst things in order to make her the worst character and inexplicably just pure evil at the very end, replacing her niece with an hologram whilst her niece was literally comatose and unable to make any decisions for herself. Like, I felt like that was the only way that could really justify this otherwise very lucky and fortunate character being so dissatisfied with her life. And it just came across as very lazy screenwriting, and there was no nuance there. Like I said, there was just good or evil, pop or hardcore rock. There's no middle ground there to make things a bit more interesting. Speaking of lack of interest, I had no interest in the two sisters, Rachel and Jack. I thought they also added to the whole Disney Channel original movie feeling. I actually thought an interesting angle to take here would have been to explore the impact of their mother's death on each sister, and the fact that one of them sought attention and validation and inspiration from Ashley O, whilst the other was reverting to just loving and adoring their mother's type of music. And they actually mentioned that. Ashley too actually asked Jack why it is that she likes that kind of music, and it's kind of alluded to that it's only because her mother liked that kind of music, which I thought was really interesting, except they do nothing with that at all. It's just brushed away, and at the end of the episode everything descends into a Disney Channel original movie where the previously comatose Ashley O reveals that she's awake again and that her aunt was an evil villain all along and she needs to be stopped, and god damn it, she would have gotten away with it hadn't it been for those meddling kids. It's just dumb. It's absolutely dumb. Wasn't a huge fan of that ending. I really wasn't a huge fan of the direction that the episode decided to take. I think they very much should have focused more on the sisters and the impacts of their mother's death and the way that that really impacted them in different ways. That was much more of an interesting angle than just having this doll who has the consciousness of Ashley O. And of course, Black Mirror has to have that technology aspect to it because that's their thing. Like I said, that's their brand. But overall, I think because the message had no real depth, there was no originality here. I mean, of course, the musician's manager is evil. We've been there, we've done that over and over again. So I think they should have just focused more on a personal story about loss, and they do that very well. I don't see why they couldn't have done it here also, other than they just wanted Miley Cyrus to star in this episode. So overall, I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. I was going to give it a 5.5, but then I started talking about it, and you know what? It's a 5. There, we're done. So overall, what would I rate season 5 of Black Mirror? Well, whilst I really enjoyed Smithereens, I have to say that I could really leave the other 2 episodes. I wasn't a huge fan of them. Episode 1 is superior to episode 3 in my opinion, but they still don't have that Black Mirror spark the way that episode 2 does. And even then, episode 2 isn't one of the best episodes of Black Mirror in general. I think it would pale in comparison to some of the earlier episodes, which were just spectacular. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and give Black Mirror season 5 an average pretty much of all of these ratings, and that is a 6.5 out of 10. So now that I've told you guys what my thoughts were on Black Mirror season 5, clearly they weren't favourable. Maybe you disagree. You can go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Please be sure to subscribe to catch any new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!